My name is Andy Galper, and I'm the founder of Cascade SF, and we're an organization dedicated to teaching the latest tips and tricks in web design. I'm also a web designer, and I've worked for a lot of startups. I've designed a lot of products, including for companies such as DirecTV, for Cisco, Indiegogo, and Smule, just to name a few. And I'd like to introduce you tonight to Josh Constine, who is a writer for TechCrunch. He covers a lot of startups, and he has also conducted an onstage interview with Mark Zuckerberg and CEO Drew Houston, as well as many other Silicon Valley stars. Prior to TechCrunch, Josh attended Stanford University and designed a master's program in cyber sociology to study how humans interact through technology. So he's got a master's in UX, pretty much. So come on out, Josh. I'll be interviewing him tonight.
Thank you guys for coming. Thank you guys all so much for coming. I know there's like a lot of cool things to be doing on a pretty day like this. So
nothing's cooler than this. So. Okay, we're going to go ahead and get the interview started, and then we will have the Q&A, so if we ask you guys to just hold your questions until we let you know. But I'd like to ask you, Josh, just to get things going, why is it so important to have good content on a website?
Well, I guess that's about as broadly as you could start, but I think really content is what draws people. You know, you can set up a skeleton and a framework and functionality for something to be useful, but the emotion comes through content, and that's where people get to have like a real connection to what you build. And so if you try to minimize your UX so much that there's no life or there's no flavor in what you do, you might actually be helping the people you might be helping your audience, but you don't end up resonating with them, and that's how you create like the memory and that emotional connection that makes them want to come back. And so I think it's critical to not only build something that's useful, but to build something that's lovable.
So let me ask you, when you go to a website, if there's a large amount of copy, do you read it, or would you just maybe scan it or ignore it? How do you handle?
I mean, it really depends on how I come into the site. If I knew what I was getting into and there's a big block of text, sometimes that might be what I expect, and so I'd be happy to go through it. But if I'm suddenly surprised by like a giant block of text, I'm much more likely to skim through it. I'm much more likely to just skip it if it doesn't seem interesting, especially if the first few lines are interesting. Like, I know I'm really busy. A lot of people are super busy these days. There's so many different sources of information and entertainment that you can find online that if you don't build something that's immediately interesting to them, it's really easy for people to tune out. And so I know that I write my articles for TechCrunch with that in mind. You know, my perspective is that I want to respect my reader the most possible. I know that if I write something that is really flowery, or I try to like set the scene in this kind of philosophical way, I can a lot of times just immediately come off as like too hippy-dippy or like too poetic or something and people will just immediately say this isn't going to be informative. And so I really like to tease as much of the content as I can early. And yeah, sometimes that doesn't make for the most beautiful opening. But I think that that's the real challenge, is trying to find a way to make something seem both beautiful and informative as quickly as possible and draw them in, because once you can get them to read a little bit, they'll become invested and they're much more likely to stick with you as you get through the nitty-gritty stuff and get to more of that poetry or that emotion later. So,
so you focus a lot on startups and writing about products and new technologies that you've learned about. How do you quickly summarize or learn about what a startup does and explain that in 1 to 2 sentences?
It's a wild process. I mean, sometimes I'll learn about a piece of news and I'll publish something within 4 minutes, which seems crazy. And sometimes that's about something I don't even know a ton about, but you learn really quickly how to do this research. And so, you know, for me, it means immediately looking up their Crunch-based profile on TechCrunch, because that's just a really great way to learn a lot about a startup really quickly. You get everything from an intro to what they are, who works there, what they're invested, or who invested in them. You might get some screenshots. I'll try to read a bunch of the news articles. I'll search search TechMeme, which is like my favorite website on the internet.
What is that?
It's called TechMeme. It's sort of the aggregator of technology news. It's supposed to be the front page of tech news on the internet. So instead of going to one website and you get everything from that same perspective, TechMeme will pull in articles from all these different sources. Whoever wrote the best version of an article or the best analysis or piece of opinion about a certain subject, they'll pull that in. And so even if that means I'm reading something from other writers that didn't come from TechCrunch, like that's totally cool. We know we're not always perfect, and that's a really quick way to research. And if possible, like I really like to try to just call someone up and get someone on the phone. That's a great way to learn about something. But I think for the people here, like that might not be quite as relevant, but you want to understand, instead I feel like you want to understand your audience, and you want to be learning as much as you can about your audience throughout the process of writing for them, because there's often a feeling of disconnect when you write online, because you're looking at a screen, you're not looking at a human, you don't get those emotional cues in response to what you say to them, and so it's easy to forget that they're even there, and you start writing for yourself, you start writing for your own goals instead of writing for the audience that you're trying to serve. And so trying to keep that in mind as much as possible and then learn about it, I feel like is the best way to make sure you're writing copy that's really effective.
And do you believe that in journalism there's the concept of not burying the lead and putting the main point of the story like 4 to 5 paragraphs in is what burying the lead is?
I hate that.
And well, as a tech writer, I'm guessing you have to try and bring that main information to the first 1 or 2 paragraphs. Could you describe your writing process to create a story?
Yeah, so I mean, a lot of articles you'll read online are sort of written from the perspective, almost as if they're like an online magazine piece. And really, I think that writing style developed from yesteryear when there wasn't all these distractions. It's like, yeah, if I open a magazine and I start reading your article, you don't really have to worry about me suddenly flitting somewhere else. And so you had more leeway in building sort of a soft opening to any piece of content. And a lot of people try to emulate that style because it comes with this air of authenticity and respectability. People think, oh, if this article is really long and it starts with something really flowery and not very hard and informative, it means that, oh, this is going to be like a big thought piece and it's like really it wasn't hastily written, and people just assume that it's going to be good. I disagree with that wholly. I think that that's really just this vestigial wing that we have when we write online. We try to write as if we were writing in a magazine because that's what we think sounds the most authentic. But you have to remember that like the audience is changing. It's a lot of kids who are younger who maybe hardly have read paper magazines, and so they don't get that same illusion. So when I try to write, really a lot of people will tell you that the way to think about something or like to crystallize thoughts about an idea is to go through that who, what, where, when, why, how process. So I like to flip that around. So in my perspective, the best way to do this is to talk about why, what, who, and then how. And so to run through like an article that I've written, for instance, today I wrote about a new company called Airpooler. They're kind of like Lyft for planes. Basically, pilots can put empty seats on their private airplanes up on this website and sell the seats almost like you would sell your room on Airbnb. And so when I thought about that, I was trying to think, I didn't want to go in and just say, okay, like, who? Like, here's this guy you've never heard of who's building this thing. Like, who cares? Like, what? Here's this thing that they built. It's like, but I don't understand what problem it solves. And so I like to go back and think about it starting with why. What is the problem that you're solving? If you're writing app copy, this really applies for if you're writing an app description or a splash page, even a Twitter bio can come in this form. So you start with why. What is the problem that you're solving? So in this case, pilots want to fly, but it's expensive to fly. Travelers want to travel, but they hate driving through traffic or going through security and getting into the airport really early. Those are the problems. That's the why. And then I go in with the what. Airpooler is a website that allows pilots to sell the empty seats on their airplanes. So that what has so much more context when you start with the why, because suddenly people already know why it's important to them. It's not just this free-floating piece of utility out in the world. They understand that there's a problem that it's directly rooted to. once I've really explained the why and what, that's when you want to get into the how. That's when you want to get into the who. And the who gives you the credibility to say, this is why this is going to be well built. You might not have used it yet, but if it came from these people who have expertise in this area, you know it's going to be good. And then once you do that, you can get into the nitty-gritty of how something actually works. And so let's take this through as like an app store description. You might immediately start saying, let's take another example. There's a great app called Will Call that's born and designed in San Francisco. It's a great app for, well, I'll just run you through what it sounds like. We have a lot of free leisure time and we don't know what to do at night. There's lots of concerts going on, but we can't find out where they are or when they are, and we miss getting tickets to them. Is that like an experience any of you guys have had? Right? So that's the why. Then the what is, Will Call is an app where you can buy last-minute concert tickets to the best events in the city. It's a curated list of events. They take care of finding out what's cool for you. Then there's the who. The founder is a designer. It's built around the idea that nightlife is something that's supposed to be stylish immediately. And so it's built by a really design-focused team that know if they're going to fit into that nightlife part of your world, they can't be something that feels like a 9-to-5 utility app. It has to feel integrated into that lifestyle. And then the how is they use Bluetooth Low Energy to be able to recognize when you come to the door of a concert so that they pull you up immediately on the guest list. They do the same thing so you can buy drinks at the bar. They have a team of curators that looks through all the concerts in the city and only picks the best ones. And so those are the nitty-gritty parts of it. And I think if you structure it that way, it comes off way better than saying, there's a whole bunch of designers and they built this app that helps you find concerts and it's for finding them right now and it's in San Francisco. But the why is the last thing they get to. I find that that's a really poor way of describing something. When you start with the why, you immediately get to a generalizable emotional connection with a product.
Okay, so let's just recap. So you start with why when you're trying to collect information to write a summary of a product. You start with why. Yeah,
start with the problem, the why. Why does it need to exist?
Okay.
Then you get the what, which is what does it actually do? What is the problem that it's solving? What is the actual product? What is the meat of it? Then there's the who, which is why you think it's important. Why is it? Who is the person behind it? Who is who can you trust that this is going to be something that's good? And then the how, which is the real deep functionality look at it. So most app store descriptions are written very similarly. They start with the problem, then they say what the app does. They say a little bit about who built it sometimes, and then there'll be a big feature list of the how.
Okay. Very helpful. So just
you talk now for a second.
Okay. Well, I'm actually really enjoying. You're teaching everybody a lot. Everybody looks very engaged right now. You guys are all learning a lot of information. Yes. Okay. Good.
Feel free to tweet mean things at me. I love it. It's
yes.
Like
Attack of the journalist. No. Okay. So. How do you prepare for an interview when you're going to interview somebody to hear their ideas behind a product?
Well, for me, I want to get that emotional resonance out of them. And it's really easy to just go in and start talking about the what and the how, but the why and the who is often the most interesting part of a story. It's something that has a lot more human connection to it, because it's not about the products, it's about the problem that it's solving for the humans and the people that built it. So most of the time, the first question I ask before people even tell me what their product does is I want to know, why did they want to build it? Like, what was their part of their life that made it essential for them to build this? And I think the best startups all have this kind of superhero origin story. It's like, well, why does Batman fight crime? It's like, well, crime killed his parents. It's like that. If you get into, you want to get to the bottom of why somebody built something, and I think that you end up with a lot more emotional resonance. So for us, for instance, like take Jack Dorsey and how he built Square. It's like you go in and ask Jack Dorsey, he's like, what does Square do? How does it do it? But I think the much more interesting question is, why did you build it in the first place? And he did a talk at TechCrunch Disrupt, and he talked a little bit about this. And he described that when he was a kid, he grew up in his dad's pizza restaurant. And he saw his dad getting frustrated that the credit card companies were demanding these high fees from him, and it was a complicated process. And more and more people wanted to pay with credit, but his dad felt like he was losing part of the money that he was rightfully earning to these credit card companies that weren't really providing much utility. They weren't making it a special especially easy for him or his customers, and they were just sort of like taxing him for what was becoming a really important and essential functionality for any piece of commerce. And so what did he do? He built something that cut a lot of that that credit card transaction process out of the flow, and he made it really easy for any merchant to offer credit card payments in a really simple way that was always affordable for them, even if somebody bought something for really cheap, like a single slice of pizza. When you buy a single slice of pizza, suddenly that 25 cents or that 50-cent credit card fee adds up really quickly. And he wanted to build something that would work for any size merchant because he saw that pain in his father. And so he ended up building something that with a flat percentage rate, which works even for small merchants.
Square is great.
So that's the first thing I usually ask people when I want to learn about why they built something. Or for a lot of you guys, if you're marketers, you can do this same process to sort of reveal the identities of your team members to your audience. Or you can reveal sort of that, you can frame your entire product around this sort of superhero origin story. And so after that, I want to know about sort of, okay, how did they get to the place where they were able to build it? Where were they before? It's like, oh, you were working on search at Google, and then you realized there was some big hole in the search infrastructure. How did you gain the domain expertise to be able to tackle this problem correctly? Once I've asked them the what and the how of how a product actually works, I want to get into what are the biggest challenges. And I think that a lot of times in copywriting, we want to present things as invulnerable or invincible. We want to sort of cover up all the problems. But a lot of times if you do that, the audience, the reader, is filling in those holes for themselves. They're not stupid. They know what's wrong with your product if you try to gloss over it. If you pretend like none of this exists, they're going to immediately assume that you're disingenuous. So for instance, today, the founder of Secret, an anonymous sharing app, wrote a blog post about the first 60 days as a company. And in it, he talked about all the amazing things that people are doing on Secret. They're supporting each other through life losses. They're opening themselves up and being more creative in their expression. They're talking about like big problems at the workplace or at home that they didn't have an outlet for. He didn't mention a single thing about cyberbullying, which is a huge issue on this app. Everyone who uses this app knows that. It's not hard. You scroll through a few stories, and you're going to see somebody sort of get defamed or bullied in the app. And the fact that he glossed over this entirely, it's not that he was even like, cyberbullying is a real issue. We don't think that there's much of it on our app, but we're still really vigilant about making sure this doesn't happen. The fact that he glossed over that entirely immediately made me lose some respect for him. And he's a really smart guy. I've met him. I did a fireside chat with him at South by Southwest. He's a good human, but when you get into copywriting, it's easy to fall into those traps of trying to pretend like you're perfect, and the reader knows you're not. So if you're willing to expose a little bit of your vulnerabilities, and instead of glossing over them, recognize your vulnerabilities and then explain why you're actually fixing them, people are going to be a lot more confident that what you're telling them overall is much more truthful. It actually works a lot like meditation. When you're meditating, a lot of times you'll get distracted, and if you get mad at yourself and you keep on and you like dwell on the fact that you keep getting distracted, like, oh, I suck at meditating, I can't stay focused, or if you like try to pretend like it's not happening and you just end up getting caught up in these random thought patterns, you stop actually meditating, you stop attaining this state of no thought, which is really cathartic and really relaxing, and instead you follow one of these thought trains, you end up losing a lot of the value. But instead, if you recognize, you say, yeah, that fly buzzed by me, I got distracted. That's a human thing to do. I'm going to recognize that happened, and I'm going to categorize it and say, okay, I'm going to try from now on not to be distracted by the random bugs that fly by me while I'm meditating. I know this sounds really weird right now, but I'm just going to stay focused on what I'm doing. By doing that mental categorization and that recognizing of your own flaws, I think that you end up you're able to be a lot more believable and a lot more truthful, and people will resonate with you more when you seem human instead of seeming infallible.
Because people can relate to you a little better.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then at the same time, at the end of any talk, I always ask companies who are their biggest competitors and what are their biggest challenges. Like, what is the thing, if your competitor was in the hot seat right now and they were saying, this is why that other guy's app is going to fail, I want you to tell me about it and then tell me why you're fixing that. And similarly, it's like, I want you to recognize that, yeah, there are other people doing it. If you try to pretend that you don't have any competitors, people are just not going to believe you. But if you say, yeah, these are the competitors, but actually they're focused focusing on this niche segment and we actually nail this other use case for this other entire audience, people are going to be able to say, yeah, and they're in it for me. They're not just trying to big up themselves.
That actually, it's not really necessarily like user experience, but it is important to recognize that a lot of people who are pitching apps, to include your competitor is really, really important, and know what they do, so that way you can kind of say, okay, well, what can we offer and how can we do it better? Right?
But it's the same way in a lot of in UX design. Like if you have an error in your app and you just try to like shoo that under the rug and just be like, oh, sorry that happened, and like try to be as like super succinct as possible and refuse to really acknowledge that anything happened. You're just basically trying to get them out of that error flow as much as possible. You lose this great opportunity to sympathize with the user. That's an opportunity, a time when you can really be like, hey, what you really want to convey is like, hey, we are really trying to provide something great for you, and we know that you're relying on us, and we screwed this up, but we care about you so much that we're really working on this. We want you to file a bug report. We have a team working on these kind of things, or even just provide them with a joke or some piece of content that sort of rewards them for stumbling into this bug, that is sort of a reward or a prize or really just like these almost like reparations for people for doing something wrong. And the more that you can take those opportunities and say, yeah, we screwed up, but we're doing better, we're working on this all the time, I think people are going to endear themselves a lot more to your app. So
you're saying that transparency is encouraged when you're copywriting?
Yeah, I mean, you don't need to dwell and say like, oh, we screwed up, we're terrible, but trying to admit that you're doing that, like everything isn't perfect. I mean, most users will understand that they're using a product that isn't, it hasn't been around for 5 years. Most of the people's products in this room probably haven't been around for 5 years, at least not in the incarnation that they are now. They hope that they're constantly evolving. And so I think that there's often a lot of sympathy for developers, more than you would think. And yeah, you might not see that in your App Store reviews where people are going to like lose their mind about some app, but there's, for each one of those people, there's dozens more who just thought that, that's the cost of using something that's on the cutting edge.
Do you have a specific example of wording to create empathy for the user? Because I do remember my father had said he was using a few airline websites to do some research, and he said the sites were so difficult to use that it made him feel stupid. So say that you're going to a page and then you get some kind of error. How would a UX designer word it so it would not, so they could relate to the user's mistake?
So here's a great one. If you've ever had like a Chrome page crash or like fail to connect, you'll get this weird little drawing of this T-Rex, and you're like, what the hell is this cute little dinosaur doing? But like, if you think about it, T-Rexes have short arms. They literally can't reach. It couldn't reach the website. And like Chrome is like admitting that in such a funny way. Instead of like trying to blame it on somebody else, they actually are conveying that in like a really cute way that once you understand it, it becomes this sort of in-joke, and you're almost like delighted when you see that. And like to turn a moment of error into one of like glee is a really impressive feat in UX design that we should all be striving for. And yeah, and at the same time, they could have tried to convey that in words, and it would have been a lot more stumbly. It would have seemed a lot more like an apology opposed to something that was just recognizing and moving on. And I think that that's what that little design does. So you can do that in words too, but another great principle I have for UX design is whenever possible, don't use words. Try to use imagery and symbols to guide the user as much as possible to what you want them to think, and use words when absolutely necessary. And in the end, you can often design your way out of a lot of the problems that would have taken multiple sentences that would have looked really clumsy in your app. And also, UX copy is certainly a lot easier to change than UX design. So if you focus on getting the design right before you add the words in, you end up having to redesign fewer times.
It's interesting that you say that, because I actually I have a cute little graphic that I found online. I'll post it later. That says, well, the designer says, well, I can't start the design until I get the content, and the content person says, well, I can't start the content until I have the design. So I do believe that the design centers around the content and around the writing.
I disagree.
You disagree? In order for you to have pictures and copy work together, you need to understand the message.
Right.
So
I mean,
maybe
just
it's
a
not
simple fact is
perfect.
that you're never going to have, there's not going to be designs inside your words, but there's going to be words inside your designs. It's really more of a layer on the top of the design. And so I think that it's usually an easier step to work on last than first. That doesn't mean you don't do anything. You don't leave the buttons blank when you're in your prototyping phase, but the more that you can get that, you can get some rough draft in there and then work on the design and then finalize the words at the end, what you'll end up doing is designing to answer as many of the questions that you were trying to answer with the copy, and then you'll have fewer things to try to answer to at the end with the words. And in the end, you want to be as concise as possible when you're talking about like micro copy inside of an app.
There could be different approaches to designing.
No, only
apps.
mine is right.
Only Josh's.
I am not a designer. I am the
Josh's,
only one who knows.
But
no,
they do,
everyone has a different style. I mean, really what you have to do is find the style that works for you and your team, but this is a general framework that I think leads to fewer headaches.
Well, okay, we'll pause on that. Continue that debate on a later occasion.
Follow that debate up with me on Twitter. If you think I'm wrong about anything I'm saying right now, I'm trying to learn too, so please hit me up at
I'll send you like 10 links
Josh Constine, which is not up there, but yeah, at Josh Constine. You can hit me up, tell me why I'm wrong, tell me why I'm right, point me towards better resources.
Hashtag UX Night, at Cascade SF, at Andy Galpern, at
hashtag sunset, hashtag selfie.
Yes, right now. I want to go into like some technicalities based on your master's degree. No, at Stanford, that's respectable. And I just want to go ahead and ask.
Well, it's only respectable. I mean, I designed this master's program, so there's no one to have really vetted it but me. So it could have been really stupid, but I think I enjoyed it.
They approved it, though.
They did approve it,
okay.
but I'm persuasive.
So we blame the person who approved it. No, I'm kidding. Yeah, okay. But, so I would like to ask you more of a technical question. We're going to go into like some sentence structuring. So say that I'm taking notes and I'm interviewing somebody and I'm just writing down a bunch of lists. What is a way to combine sentences in a seamless way and then make it all flow very smooth?
Well, I think one thing is people seem really afraid of apostrophes in UX copy, and like I think that's silly. It's like unless you're writing an app for scientists, don't talk like a scientist. Like I did this for so long in my own writing and for my articles. I came from this academic background, so everything I wrote was supposed to be exactly in place, and there couldn't be any like colloquialisms or any like culture or flavor in it. And what I ended up realizing was that the more you write like that, the more you write like a robot, even if the like total number of words is smaller, it's harder to read and people are more likely to tune out. It's like if any of you have ever read Marx, it's like some of Marx's big most important treatises aren't that many pages, but it is like exhausting to read them just because every word matters. Like he spares not a single. There's no floweriness in anything. Every single word means something. And while it might end up being short in page count, it's really tough to read, and you have to really persevere to do it. And that was how I was really writing when I first started. A writer that I really like to look to for inspiration in terms of improving this was M.G. Siegler. He was an old writer at TechCrunch, and he's willing to. His articles will frequently, his bigger ones will end up being multiple, thousands of words, but they feel really breezy to read. You speed through them, and they seem like kind of like a joy. It's more like reading young adult fiction than it is like reading some philosophy textbook. And like that, and I don't mean that in any demeaning way. It just means that he's able to convey these concepts in ways that are culturally recognized and are easy for people to ingest and digest. And so even though the articles are longer, you feel like you read them quicker, and you feel like you had a lot better time when you finished. And a lot of times the ideas weren't totally packed on top of each other, so you don't feel like they all blended together. There was space in between the different ideas thanks to his little cultural ramblings or his little tangents that make it feel a lot more, it's a lot easier to remember in the end. And I think you can bring a lot of that to UX design as well. Like, you don't need to write something so it's the minimum number of words. You need to make it feel like it's the minimum number of words. And so really that a lot of times that can mean using apostrophes or using colloquialisms or just write like you talk. If you were to explain a product to someone, imagine you were narrating it to them instead of writing it, and a lot of times you'll end up with copy that will read much faster. Even though it's more words, it'll take less time for the mind to digest.
I was looking, when I was doing research to try to figure out which questions to ask you, I came across a lot of reporters were using like a text-to-speech program to take notes or to write. Do you use any of those, like Dragon, or Evernote has one for the Android?
No, my personal process, now I've started to record more of my interviews just in case I want to like be sure to nail an exact quote, because I'm pretty good at being, like really what I normally have been doing for the last few years is I will just write as fast as I possibly can. I will type everything somebody says, because by doing that I feel like I ingrain that information into myself, and at the end I end up with this huge block of text that I can skim really easily. And like a lot of people I know just do their audio recordings. It is so agonizing to go through an audio recording and try to pull out any insights, especially if you talk to someone for a half hour and are only going to write a few hundred or like 1,000 words about something. It's a total mess. It's horrible to have to pull that out of an audio recording. So I just try to take as many notes as I can. I have like a lot of weird little shorthands that I use, like FEA is feature to me. It's like I shortened a lot of words in my own little like scrawl, and that helps me. But yeah, so.
There's an app called Audio Note, and I used it a few years ago, but it's still awesome. You press record and you can type notes, and it will actually it will sync up to a timeline, and it's very good for.
I just like occasionally, I'll just like look back at my own audio recording, and like occasionally I'll just add in little anchors like, oh, I'm at 20 minutes, 32 seconds right now, and so that I can easily jump around if necessary.
Yeah.
But let's talk more about writing instead of listening, because you don't want to hear about me listening.
Listening is a big part of writing, because you need to gather information to be able to communicate it.
Sometimes, but a lot of times I feel like the identity of your brand or the product that you're building is already inside you. It's like it's all in there. It's a matter of coming up with new ways to refract that same information into new patterns. It's about taking that one white beam of light and breaking it into all these different pieces and looking at it at all these different angles. And so a lot of times I think you actually know a lot about what you want to say. It's a matter of figuring out how to say it that's the hardest part. And that's where a lot of great A/B testing can come in. So I think that's a really good way to learn more about how to do that is, don't assume that you ever know the answer to anything if you have the option to gather data about what people actually do.
Do you have any references as far as a book or an app or something that you use for researching, is this correct grammar? Am I putting my sentences together in a way that people understand it? Do you have any tools that you recommend?
I have this app called Friends, who I'll talk to about whenever I write something. Like, there's a few people who are just really, like, I know that are just killer writers, kids who were debate champions in high school, or they write fiction, they write a completely different thing than I write, and they have such amazing perspectives on language and how to use it. And so I've tried to create a little brain trust of those people around me to bounce things off of when I need to. And I think that a lot of great, if you're a marketer or a community manager or a copywriter or a designer, you should be trying to create that same kind of brain trust across other companies that your friends work at, instead of just doing that all within your own company. And it might seem a little weird. It's like I'm working on helping somebody else at another company during my own work time, but you would hope that your boss would understand that it's this value exchange and that you're getting more heads on the problem by doing this. So if you look at any of a lot of the best writers in technology right now, if you look at their essays, take Paul Graham for instance, at the bottom of any of his essays is like, thank you to these 7 people who read drafts of this post. And it goes such a long way. I personally I think you should write something that you feel through that's really just true to your heart first. But once you have that initial expression, don't be afraid to pick it apart and have other people get their eyes on it and massage it from there. Because it's amazing that, I think the most emotional and the most powerful writing comes straight from the heart. And like a lot of times I know my best writing is the stuff I never edit. It's the stuff I wrote the first time and it was just like, I don't know, it was just vivid and like passionate. It was like, I don't know, I felt like my mojo coming out when I wrote it. And like I try to keep as much of that as possible, but at the same time, like a lot of times you'll show that to someone and they'll be like, all of this is great, except for this one thing doesn't make any fucking sense. And and having those other eyes, like you can't always see that yourself. And having the more people that you can get look at your writing, I think before you press it out, the better. And that doesn't mean you have to be slow. There's a big difference between like agonizing over your writing and having someone take a quick scan of it, and instead of maybe doing line by line edits and them actually editing the text, you should just give them, you know, an uneditable copy and have them give you their impressions afterwards, because that's a similar vibe that you're going to get from the readers after they read something. You want to be controlling for that end perception. It's, you know, you're not asking your audience to rewrite any of your product. You want to know how they feel afterwards, and so that should be the same thing you're looking to get from your brain trust.
Very good. Could you give us an example, going into more of the technical, academic side of things, an example of an active sentence, an active verb versus a passive verb? And
Nope. I cannot.
Okay.
I have no classical writing background, by the way. I'm a sociologist by trade. I was an undergrad in sociology and then a graduate in cyber sociology. Never wrote for the school paper, never wrote fiction. Yeah, and like, I want to read more books, but I honestly don't have time to read even that many books. Like, the way that I learned to write is just like is from the heart, and for me it's like if I read it back and it makes sense and it feels right, that's what's right, not like what some style guide tells me is the right way to say something. Like I speak in fragments, I start lots of sentences with like but or and or so, because that's how we talk, that's how we convey things to people. Is a lot of times the ideas we're trying to convey in the technology industry are almost too complex to compact into a single sentence, and so you need to break them up in ways that make them feel more comprehensible. And so a lot of times it's not about like having the perfect sentence, but a group of sentences that together convey the idea.
But also, do you think that listing them as bullet points in terms of when designing for the web or going to visit a website they're explaining a product or trying to explain sorry, can't. Yeah. Words jumbled. When a product is being explained to you on a website and they need to get the information to you very quickly, do you believe that bullet points are the best way to go about that? Or would you suggest like one clumped sentence? How do you think is the most, what do you think is the most effective way to?
I mean, they both have their time. So like, if you're trying to convey a bunch of distinct different ideas, then bullet points will work, and you can really make them as short as possible, like really short bullet points. But you know, if you have one big idea, trying to like pick at it from a bunch of bullet points doesn't make sense. And sometimes like starting your app with like one long sentence can actually be the right move if that's the best way to convey the emotion and identity of what you're building. Yeah.
Okay. All right, so moving into your process, how long does it take you to come up with the headline? Is that the first thing that you do, or do you write up the article first and then add the headline in later?
So I write all of my everything I write is almost entirely written in exact order that you read it. I start with the headline, because when you write the headline, then you know what words not to use in the first sentence. You're not going to end up tripping over yourself. Whereas if you write the first sentence, you might use all those juicy words that would have been awesome in the headline. And so I try to write the headline first. Then I know, okay, I can't use maybe those 3 words for another like 2 sentences. Then I can find another way to come at the same a similar concept in the first sentence. And then I'll try to write the first first paragraph of anything I write will be essentially. It's like, why does this happen? What does it do? And then I'll end it with, these are the sort of very pertinent details of today, like why is this newsy or why is this important right now? And then I'll tease sort of the longer vision of what I'm writing. So I try to get to hint at, oh, it's not going to be all facts. There's going to be some of my identity and some of my analysis and opinion in this later. Because if somebody already knows what you're talking about, they might assume that whatever you're writing is going to be completely old to them. Whereas if you tease a little bit of that really personal, subjective analysis, you create this hook that like, oh, there is something that I couldn't possibly have thought of already in this story, and so I got to work my way to it. So I think that you can do a lot of that with, if you're writing press releases. I think that that's also a really important way of doing it. It's not about just laying out each fact in order. It's about giving a general idea of why something is important and why is it important right now, and then teasing what the like deeper second level understanding is that you're going to sort of extrapolate on later in whatever you're writing.
When you go to write for Twitter, or like explain a product or try to get a message within 140 characters, do you have any tricks to do that?
So when I tweet, I generally write however I would imagine like a thought myself, no matter how many characters it is, and usually it'll end up taking like 180 or 220 characters or something. And then I'll start going back and I'll look at, hey, that word was unimportant, that didn't make any sense, that can be abbreviated, that can be shortened, this whole idea is too much to try to impress on people really early, and I'll keep on cutting back and back and back and sort of hacking at it with this social media machete until I get down to like a really brief and punchy phrase, and something that not only, you don't want it to, well, there's two ways. If you write something that does not include a link, then you want to embody the entire idea at once. And in those cases, I think you can take a little bit more room. You can use more of the characters. Like it might be acceptable to use like 125 or 130 of the characters. You don't need to leave as much room at the end. Whereas if you're posting about a link, there's going to be so much information behind that link that people are going to be able to form their own opinions about what you're saying. And so you probably want to leave more room for them to be able to, manually tweet with their own impression or their own interpretation of what you're writing. So hey, that's just my way of writing for tweets. But a fascinating tip that I've heard is that in some cases, if you put a link in the middle of your tweet instead of the end of the tweet, it will actually perform better. It'll get more clicks, just because it looks different. It doesn't feel like the same tweet that they've read 100 times where it's like, I'm promoting this thing and here it is. Instead it's like, there's this thing and here's the link and here's what I think about it. And it becomes more of like, it feels more like a conversation than a broadcast.
It's a good tip, but does Twitter automatically, when they shorten the URL, does it go to the end of the sentence or the end of the tweet?
Not if you,
no?
I mean, no, generally it doesn't. You can place the link in wherever you want. It does that with photos, which I really don't like, because sometimes I want to put that photo link in the center, but
We're giving them a tip, so they can Twitter take action.
Plenty of things Twitter could do, the way that any of the big social companies have tons of things that they could iterate on. But I think that's an important way of thinking about like anything around product design, but also UX is it's easy to get into to fall into the trap of writing something or designing something for you, and that is you are not the audience. The audience is the audience. You have to get out of the building in a lot of cases. That's like a core of the lean startup mentality is you need to be building for your customers or building for your audience. And so think about what is going to resonate with the widest group of people, not just what you think is right. And you have to get out of your own head a lot of times to be able to do that. And I think it's really important to get as much of that outside feedback into your UX copy as early as possible when you're working on something. And so that means when you're doing like beta testing and you're doing focus grouping and you watch somebody use an app, you don't want to just be watching what they do. You want to like listen to how they're talking through them things. A lot of times people will like sort of talk out loud, or you can ask them to sort of like talk out loud what you're doing, and you'll see them if they read a sentence in your app, like a piece of your UX copy, and they like hesitate on a word, it's probably that word doesn't feel natural to them and could be replaced with something better. Or if you hear them calling something a different word, like they call it their own version, you're probably trying to like top down assign a name to something that already has a sort of bottom-up name to it inherently. And so the more you can try to think about it that way and get that outside perspective into your UX copy as early as possible, I think you end up with something that feels more accessible to a wider audience. And most apps these days, I really think the biggest problem is not the app itself. It's not about the functionality. It's about traction. There's a million good products. Having a great idea is not enough anymore to succeed in Silicon Silicon Valley or in anywhere in technology. You have to build something that like feels, and it can't just be be as this piece of utility. It has to make people feel something as well.
And it has to be simple. Just as dumb as possible, people.
No, not as dumb as possible. Do not talk down to your users ever.
No, when I say dumb, I mean keep things like as simple as possible so everybody will understand it.
Right. Allow smarter people to add their own interpretation of something while making it accessible to people who are less well-versed in whatever you're talking about. But no one is stupid. It's just a matter of they haven't gotten the education about whatever you're talking about yet.
Or maybe using universal terms that everybody will understand, not just one person.
No, well, I mean, it's you want everyone in your audience to understand it. So like, I'm gonna pull out my phone for a second to read off some examples that I took of some really good ways that you can describe things in ways that don't feel like you're a robot. So like, for instance, Will Call, this app, they had a concert that they had, and the concert sold out, but they had extra tickets. So they could have been like, concert X has sold out, but you can still buy tickets on Will Call. Instead, they're like, get your tightest pants on. Mr. Little Jeans is sold out, but we still got the skinny. Be quick. And like, that sounds kind of ridiculous, but at the same time, it's like pretty evocative of the brand that they're trying to capture and the audience, which is like very much the like 16 to 30 audience. And so when you're thinking about it, that's your audience. That's who you're writing for. It doesn't have to be generally accessible to everyone on the planet, because like unless everyone on your planet is a possible user of what you're building, there's no point to write for them. Write for whoever it is that you really want to use the app. And honestly, a lot of times you want to go with a niche to win strategy. Nail a certain demographic or a certain customer segment, and then from there allow them to help you build into a wider audience. So like some other ones, another one, like I think it's kind of funny, like Lulu, which is this app where women can rate men as romantic partners. When somebody views your profile, you don't get a notification being like, somebody viewed your profile. It's like smile and wave, somebody's looking at your profile right now, and it feels much more like there's this human connection, even though there's like this giant barrier in the app. Literally, you can't directly connect with the other, men and women cannot directly talk to each other in this app, but they bridge that divide with this notification with really good UX copywriting, and it feels like it feels what it's really about, which is breaking down the barriers between men and women so that they can understand each other from a more transparent perspective and hopefully find happier relationships. And like that's what it's about, and it's about making that connection to people. And I think that by using something a little colloquial like smile and wave, like that works a lot better. And yeah, like in some countries, like waving at people is offensive, but that's not who their audience is, so that's how they wrote it.
The Eat 24 Hours, have any of you guys ordered food from there? Eat24hours.com. They have, when you're done placing an order, they have really cute pre-made tweets, and they're like, no, I'm not feeling this one. Let's randomly see what else they have. And they're really well written and kind of clever, and so I give them props. But I want to go ahead and open this up for the audience Q&A, and we have one of our volunteers is going to pass around a microphone. And raise your hand if you have a question. You, sir. Yes. Right there. Yes.
Oh, do I got it?
You stand up, and then we'll bring the microphone to you.
Before we get over there, a lot of the stuff that we talked about was around like UX design or like marketing design, but a big issue for a lot of startups is fundraising, and a lot of these tips come straight from top investors, people like Fred Wilson at Union Square Ventures, who really says whenever anyone pitches him, he wants to hear about the problem first and then how you solve it, opposed to who the team is or like the nitty-gritty of how it works or how popular it's going to be one day. Starting with that emotional resonance works across a really wide range of writing. Please.
Thank you.
Hi.
So can you please give us more, well, I really liked this last part where you gave us specific examples, good examples. Can you please give us more good examples and bad examples?
Sure.
I mean specific examples, like read from something.
So, here's one example. It's like when you tip in Lyft, the driving app, they don't, it's not like, oh, thank you for tipping. They don't use copy. Sometimes it's about not using copy at all. And so instead, what they do is every time you press to add $1 of tip, this little balloon that's like attached to the top of the car in the center of the screen starts to inflate and it rises up. And if you like add enough dollars, like the fireworks start going off and it just gets like, it's really pretty and delightful. And there was no amount of words that they could have used in that situation to be able to convey that that delight. And so I think sometimes it's about understanding when not to use words at all. Another thing is like, I really like it when apps, Lyft also does this, is that they say things very directly, but then they also add like sort of like a thank you or a please at the end of what they say. So it'll be like, for them, it's like they need like your Facebook authentication so that they can, for their trust system, so that you can't like go on some murderous rampage and then just like start a new Lyft account and do it all over again. And so they'll be like, connect your Facebook account, please. And even just that little please, like you're asking for something, and so thanking the user for it or saying please, I think is like a really critical a way to do that. Let's see,
so manners apply.
Yeah, manners definitely apply. I mean, again, it comes back to like writing the way that you would talk to someone. You wouldn't ask for someone to like give you something out of their pocket that's like important to them and not thank them for it or say please for it. It would just come off as really as blunt. And even if you're like, oh, great UX design and UX copy is always super concise, as few words as possible. That's not always, like I said, it's not always true. Adding a little bit of emotion and flavor into it can make a longer sentence seem shorter. Let me think about some other ones. I will come back in a few minutes.
We can always Josh can come back and
Does anybody else have like good examples that they really like in UX copy design, or like bad or negative opportunities, things? Nobody wants to shit on anyone? Come on, it's like a big opportunity to just like.
Shit, it's a good word that I found the other day. It was funny. I had my GPS turned off on Yelp, and the error message, I guess not error message was, hey, are you a ninja? Can't see ya. It's this little, and it's great. It's this little ninja guy, and I'm like, I'm not a ninja, but I don't have my GPS on. Cute.
One example I really like is in Hipmunk, the flight search engine. When you search for something, it takes a little bit of time because it has to query all these third-party sites for the flight details to make sure that it's finding you like the best price. And what they do is, as they do that, they actually run through the name of each of those sites. It's like, searching searching Expedia, searching Orbit, searching all these things. And instead of you just waiting there and looking at this blank screen as it loads, it's actually giving you something to look at in the meantime. And it might seem like, well, nobody cares if you're like searching Alaska Airlines and Frontier Airlines and all these things. It's like, well, they do care if they don't have anything else that they can do while they wait. And so I think like trying to look at those opportunities, like when is there like a roadblock or a stopping point in your app where there's something that has to happen on the back end, and using that as an opportunity to do better branding on the front end.
There have been a lot of presentations that I've seen a lot of presentations where they referenced Hipmunk as having great user experience design. So that is a good reference. We'd like to open it up for a few more questions.
Thinking of some more for you though.
Bars back there. Please bring him the microphone. Thank you. Right. Just if you have a question, stand up and then we can find you. Yeah.
What's funny is like I think that all the worst ones, it's like sometimes you think like, oh, terrible things always stand out in your mind. I think I just forget those apps entirely when they have bad UX.
What do you do when somebody gets to write when somebody scoops what you're writing? Say like, oh my God, Pando Daily came out with the app story before I did. What's your strategy?
Well, I think it's about knowing that you have some subjective opinion or value that no one else on the planet can offer. And you want to make sure that whatever you're doing in your life, you're applying that little unique DNA to your purpose. And so if I'm writing something that somebody else could like completely scoop me on, then I'm writing a shitty article, personally, I think. I think that like if anything I write, I would hope that there would be like a deeper second level analysis or piece piece of opinion that would make it unique to me. So even if they wrote it before me, it wouldn't matter. It's like, I don't care if they wrote it before me. I'm going to write it better, and I'm going to write it in a way that people really understand and resonate with. And I think the same goes with design. Is, it's not about necessarily always being first. Like, yeah, being first is a great example, or sorry, is a great advantage. But you just have to find what is it unique that you do, and focus on that and highlight that instead of being like, like getting down on yourself for saying somebody else did it first. Like, you want to just always be thinking about how to do it better and how to do it your way, because hopefully people aren't just using your app or whatever you do for the functionality. They're doing it for the emotional resonance as well. And like that's how I feel about using Hipmunk. It's like there's a bunch of different, I could use Kayak or all these other ones, but a lot of them feel, like Kayak came way before Hipmunk, but I don't use it. I use Hipmunk because I feel something when I use it. I feel like they're actually working for me, and it's like this cutesy character that understands my agony in traveling. That's like their big thing, is they have this agony index that like calculates not just what is the cheapest flight or the shortest flight, but like make sure that it downranks flights that you have to wake up at 3:30 in the morning to catch, or that have like a terrible layover in like a stupid town somewhere. Like they factor that in a way that makes me feel like they are emotionally cognizant of what I need and what I'm looking for. And so I think that you can do that in design to one up anyone.
It's just like the same thing when there must be so many startups that come up with an idea, and so many people are like, oh, I have the idea. Oh, but they could have the same idea, but it's all about how they present the idea and how they execute it. And
yeah, it's like they say modern art is, I could have done that plus, but you didn't. It's like, yeah, once you saw that, you sure were able to think of it, but the whole thing is like understanding it and having it bubble out of you like originally. And the same way, it's like, yeah, somebody else could make a cool looking cube, but like you want to have your cube have its own texture and its own, its own luminosity. It's like its own properties that make it different.
We have a question in the back there. Yes.
Yeah, hi. My question is with regards to SEO and using appropriate key terms. It's probably not so much an issue for TechCrunch, but for me, with trying to find my community through natural searches, I've been told to stuff a lot or use certain ratios, and I don't know if you ever dealt with that.
Yeah, so like sometimes when I'm writing something, if I want it to reach the maximum number of people, I think a lot about like what are they going to search? Like what are the order of the words that they're going to search in? And I try to like structure my headlines to fit that. And if I want my headline to be something more touchy-feely, I'll put all those words into the URL slug instead, which helps for SEO as well. But one really fascinating thing that I've found is that if I write an article and I just put a bunch of SEO terms into the URL, like that's the sort of end of the URL, a lot of times that, sure, I think it might get me more search traffic, but what really happens is if I put like something really funny or like insightful or some little like joke, almost the way that you would like use a sort of sarcastic hashtag at the end of a tweet, if I put that as my URL slug instead, I find that people a lot of times will share it for that exact reason. So like one time I wrote this article, it was like, this is some boring stuff. This is the director of Facebook's retargeted advertising platform leaving to go to an ad startup. Like, who the hell wants to read that? Turns out there's a few people who really care about this, but this guy's name was Antonio Garcia Martinez. And so I made the slug of the article, Antonio Garcia Ads Martinez. And like, for some reason, all these people in the ad community thought that was really funny, and like it got way more traction and way more retweets and shares, and people were like commenting on that, and they like all of his friends suddenly like had this this emotional resonance with it, and they wanted to share it as well. And so sometimes doing something that's sort of contrary to what you would think would be best SEO practice, if it really embodies your identity and the brand that you're trying to convey, it can go farther than just trying to play it as a scientist.
Okay, we have time for 2 more questions, so make them good, people.
Okay, so I'm interested in your own emotional experience, especially when you talk about resonating with your audience, knowing your audience, and getting to, connecting with your audience and getting outside of your head. You write for like 1 million fucking people, so how do you relate to such a large cross-section of humanity at once?
Great question.
I try to keep my ears open as much as possible. Like whenever I write something, like I really like get into it in the comments, and I'll like defend my piece on Twitter, and I'll search for the link, not just for my own name, but I'll search for anyone that that tweeted the link of it, and I'll look at what they're saying, and if they're saying something negative, I'll engage them and ask them like how I could do better. And a lot of times, you know, being willing to know that you're not doing everything right and to go out there and proactively ask how you could get better, that's a really great way to understand what's going wrong. And also, like, we have an amazing platform. So like when we tweet when we publish an article, it immediately gets tweeted to 2 million people. And so we get a really, really good real-time feedback. And like I'm not afraid to go back in and add an update to an article that I wrote 10 minutes ago, because I could learn a lot in that 10 minutes. When you think about it, it's like, well, if you have 10,000 smart people read it, then like the 1,000 smartest of them leave a comment, and you read the 500 smartest of those. It's like that's so much content, so much understanding. So I think being a really good listener and trying to like proactively go out there and request people to defame you, like ask them what's the dumbest thing you did in this product choice or in this article or in this pitch. You'd be amazed at how quickly you start to see your articles from a third perspective, and you're able to improve them a lot better.
So don't be afraid of criticism.
No, embrace it.
Yeah.
I mean, it's so much more fun too that way. And if somebody's like objectively trolling you, like just like laugh them off. Like send them some ridiculous reaction GIF or just some silly meme, or just completely ignore them. But like if somebody's giving you really good critical feedback, like they're actually saying something that you did wrong, and like you look at it and you're like, you get this sort of like sinking feeling in your gut, like yeah, I did fuck that up. Like those are the times when you that's how you learn the most, I think. So being unafraid of that, because what you want to be, I would hope that all of you are doing something with your life, that your profession is also your passion, and it's something that you want to do for a long time. If it's not, go find that thing. But once you've found that thing, treat it as a craft. Treat it as something that you suck at first, and you're trying to shoot for how you're going to be at it in 5 years or 10 years. Like I'm thinking about doing this for like minimum 5 more years, 10 more years. So I say, what do I want to be then? And I know it's going to be a lot different than I am now. And the only way to get there is to find out what I'm doing wrong. So you know, until you're a grand master, you should be actively embracing your criticism.
It's beautiful. Hi. We have one more question. Yeah. Hi. Who has the mic?
I'm Christine. Hi. Hi. My question is.
Can't see. Oh.
Okay. So for those of us who aren't currently doing our passion, so say we want to do more writing, what are the different avenues you think that you could go through to be a successful writer in the digital age, and then how would you build up your body of work if maybe you're doing some stuff at work that's writing, but it's not really demonstrating that you're a great writer?
So the internet has democratized the platform of writing to the point that if you're writing about something that anyone can write about, what you're writing has already been said. And there's going to be so many voices mimicking the same perspective that you're never going to be able to get traction. The market or the audience for whatever you're trying to say is super fragmented across all these people. So what I recommend for anyone trying to do more writing in their life, pick one thing that you could never get bored of. The one thing that you could learn day in and day out, and when everyone else is rolling your eyes, you're opening them even wider. And for me, that was Facebook marketing. It was something that I was just really fascinated by, because it was okay, my God, there's all these businesses that are suddenly have this huge platform, but they have no idea how they're going to use it. And how can what I so I try to specialize as much as possible around this very narrow segment of social identity and cyber sociology. And so I just kept on hammering and writing about that specifically. So, after at school, it was yeah, I could have done a sociology master's degree or a communications or psychology or something that everyone has heard of, but then I'd just be one of another 10,000 or 10 million psychology majors. Not that there's anything wrong with it, but what I tried to do was find something that I could be the best at. Find the thing that you can be the best at, and then just write every day about it. Because if it's narrow enough, everyone else will think it's boring, and that will just, the whole pack will fall away, and you'll end up rising to the top. And then you'd be amazed. The internet has created this marketplace for people with expertise. There's always somebody out there who wants to know the really obscure thing, as if you're an expert at it. So pick that one tiny little thing, and it gets really really narrow, like really narrow. If you think you found it already, then like think of like try to break it out into 10 more things that all fit under that umbrella, and then pick one of those and do it again until you found something so niche that you're sure that you can be the best in the world at. And then just write every day about it, and eventually the people who need that information will find you, and you will have a dream profession of being able to write straight from your heart and do something where you can learn every day and never get bored. And to me, that's what life's about. Yeah, put it on a blog. I mean, right now, like, I think you should own your audience as much as possible. Like, Medium is great for distribution. You know, being like big about writing on Twitter is great, but like, you want to have some property where you can have full control of the emotional feel of what you're writing, and it can really be like a whole, you know, a shrine to your own contribution to the world. Not a shrine to you, but a shrine to your contribution. And own that space as much as possible. And you know, with time, you can use all those other social platforms to funnel people there, and use as many of them as possible. I mean, there's a lot of obscure ones. Like Quora Blogs is a great one. You can like, you know, write a little blurb about what one of your blog posts and publish it on Quora, and then anyone looking for some knowledge about that topic will end up getting funneled to your site. You know, try to create as many of those inroads, but own that end point where your writing is, and then when no one will get lost in the identity of who it is that's really writing this, and they'll know to come to you.
Very good. Thank you, Josh. We're just about done with all the questions, and we want to thank you so much for this.
Guys, thank you so much for having me here. This is really fun.
Awesome presentation.
You did a great job moderating too. Everyone give it up to Andy. I think she did a really good job.
Thank you.